Hello everyone, this is a response to Deskarewski's video on the world's best religion. You make a number of points here that I have some trouble with, so I'm going to address some of them. You said it was implied but not openly stated by atheists that believers or Christians were somehow mentally deficient. Well, I think you should think about this. You're suggesting that atheists as a group do not openly state this, that this widely held belief that believers are mentally deficient. Don't you think that's odd that a whole group would imply and believe and therefore imply this, and yet never state it openly? Does that make sense? I don't know, I think you should think about that. But it's interesting because this is a meme, if you will, an idea that spreads from mind to mind that maybe has been given life by people such as yourself. Anyways, if this is a meme, I'd like to point out that Richard Dawkins is in fact invented the concept of a meme, which brings us to the next point here, is that you're suggesting that atheists put up Richard Dawkins as if he was some messiah. That's interesting. Atheists tend not to engage in hero worship. Certainly we don't worship messiahs. So it's interesting that you put up the straw man of Richard Dawkins and then proceed at some length to knock it down. First of all, I'd like to point out that Richard Dawkins is a serious evolutionary biologist. He writes books about science. They aren't science textbooks, but they are books about science. And to call them mere speculation, I think, is really a denigration that's not warranted. I guess as an example of the kind of science he engages in, one of the things he helped explain was why natural selection promotes altruism rather than working against it. And I think that that's an interesting scientific discovery. But in any event, if atheists were to put forward a list of so-called big boys, Richard Dawkins may or may not be there, but I suspect we might include other people, such as Noam Chomsky, Bertrand Russell, Francis Crick, James Watson, Abraham Lincoln, Galileo, Helen Keller, Thomas Edison, Marvin Minsky, John Conway, Linus Pauling, Bill Gates, and Richard Feynman. That I think is a somewhat more impressive list than merely Richard Dawkins standing alone. So, and also, I mean, don't exaggerate the role of Isaac Newton. He did a great thing in what he did discover, but you have to place that into the context of the ignorant world that he lived in. In a sense, he was lucky in that the fundamentals were available for him to discover, essentially. So, and he didn't invent calculus; he co-invented it with Leibniz. And even to this day, we use Leibniz notation, not Newton's notation. Okay, and so you then went on this rant about most people, or sorry, that atheists were a minority, and I think that that's fine. I mean, we recognize that, I think. But on the other hand, geniuses, billionaires, and sports champions are also minorities, so I'm not sure what kind of a point you were making there. So you say that most scientists believe in God and have in the past. Well, I think that is a kind of tricky way of stating things. I think, I mean, you're correct, but that's because um, atheism is kind of a shunned philosophy, even in modern day. But certainly in the past, atheism was really not an acceptable philosophy, and so it shouldn't surprise anyone that scientists from antiquity would not be atheist. I mean, I don't think that that's too surprising. I mean, what has happened is that science has slowly but surely transformed the world into a more secular society, so atheism has sort of only come into prominence in modern day. And so it's not surprising also to see that more and more scientists are atheists, especially nowadays. Then you made a final little interesting error in which you suggested that humans and their friends the monkeys have always been making temples. I'd like to point out that monkeys do not make temples, and if I were to read your implication here, humans did not come from monkeys. That's not the way evolution works. What happened is that humans and monkeys had a common ancestor, often referred to as the missing link. So perhaps if you don't want to have the implication constantly running around in your head about your mental lapses, you might like to stop making mental lapses. Anyways, these are my thoughts.